The human vet just whispered the quarantine ward of Station 12 smelled of burnt copper, ozone, and the distinct, copper-thick tang of absolute terror. Behind 3 meters of reinforced, magnetically polarized quartz, something ancient and terrible was dying in the dark. It was designated as specimen number 004, a Class 12 apex predator harvested from the obsidian deep-crust worlds of the Carina Reach. The Galactic Zoological Syndicate had spent 6 standard cycles trying to catalog it and 3 centuries trying to contain it. It possessed 4 sets of hydraulic jaws, a hide composed of carbonized scales that could shrug off a plasma rifle round, and a neurological layout so riddled with defensive aggression that it had bitten off its own right forelimb just to spite the automated medical drones sent to sedate it. The chief medical officer, a towering, chitin-plated arthropod named Vrix, clicked his mandibles in profound agitation as he watched the monitor. The creature's vital signs were dropping into flatlines. Its internal temperature was spiking past 400 degrees Celsius. "It is rejecting the regenerative nanogel," Vrix clicked, his translation unit spitting out a harsh, mechanical monotone. "The localized neural inhibitors are failing. If it breaches the containment seal, the entire orbital sector will be scrubbed from existence within 20 minutes. Prepare the thermal dissolution charges. We are going to incinerate the specimen." "Wait!" The voice was soft, carrying the warm, slightly rumpled cadence of a creature far too fragile for an orbital slaughterhouse. Vrix turned his multifaceted eyes downward. Standing at the observation console was a human volunteer. He wore a simple, faded green tunic with the frayed sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His name was Arthur, though the station's automated systems simply listed him as a Tier 1 foster handler, a classification the Syndicate had approved as a desperate, last-ditch administrative gamble after every clinical protocol had failed. Arthur did not look like a soldier, nor did he look like a scientist. He looked like a man who spent his weekends fixing old combustion engines in a dusty garage. "We do not wait," Vrix clicked sharply, his claws tapping a rapid warning rhythm against the console. "That beast is a living engine of malice. It is unhealable. It was bred in the furnace hells of Carina to kill everything it touches. Clinical detachment is the only way to manage a Class 12 entity." Arthur sighed, wiping a hand across his forehead. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, foil-wrapped packet of synthetic beef tallow crackers, and tossed them into the waste bin. "Clinical detachment is why it's chewing its own arm off, Vrix," Arthur muttered. "You're treating a living creature like a broken boiler. You can't patch up a panic attack with a welding torch." Before the chief medical officer could protest, Arthur keyed the access code, overrode the primary safety locks, and stepped past the threshold of the airlock, moving directly into the biocontainment cell. The gallery behind the glass erupted into a chorus of frantic gasps from the assembled xenobiologists. A human, unarmed, unarmored, and practically naked by galactic standards, had just walked into the cage of the most lethal carnivore in the Orion Arm. The darkness inside the cell rippled. From the shadows of the vaulted chamber, 2 pairs of luminous, amber eyes snapped open. A low, subterranean vibration shook the floorboards, rattling the medical instruments on their trays. It wasn't a roar. It was a frequency so deep it liquefied the air in your lungs, the warning growl of a thing that had never known mercy and had never had any reason to learn. A mass of blackened scales and shifting muscle lunged from the gloom. It moved with the terrifying speed of a falling meteor. In less than a heartbeat, specimen 004 slammed into Arthur, driving the human backward against the reinforced bulkhead with an impact that should have turned his ribs into powder. Vrix lunged for the emergency lockdown button. "He's dead," the officer clicked in horror. "The experiment is terminated." Through the glass, Arthur's body was entirely eclipsed by the sprawling nightmare geometry of the beast. The creature's primary jaws parted, revealing rows of serrated bone spikes dripping with caustic saliva, hovering mere inches from Arthur's throat. The air hissed where the monster's breath melted the collar of his tunic. Yet Arthur did not scream, he did not flail, he didn't even reach for a weapon. Instead, his hands, steady, calloused, and absurdly gentle, reached up. He didn't try to push the massive, crushing weight away. He simply slid his palms upward, past the carbonized armor of the creature's jaw, and laid them flat against the soft, shivering skin just behind its primary sensory slits. The monster froze. Its massive, hydraulic muscles locked tight. The amber eyes widened, their vertical slits dilating in pure, unadulterated confusion. For 300 years, every living thing that had ever approached this creature had brought lasers, needles, electric cattle prods, or automated restraints. It expected pain. It expected the burning sting of sedatives and the cold click of synthetic shackles. It did not expect warmth. Arthur closed his eyes, leaning his forehead gently against the monster's burning hot snout, right where a jagged scar marred its scales. "Easy, buddy," Arthur whispered. "I got you. You're okay, let it out. It's safe to let it go now." The words were spoken in English, a dead language to the galactic collective, but the tone, the ancient, universal cadence of a mammalian mammal comforting its young, carried across the species barrier with absolute clarity. The monster's breath hitched. The low, destructive vibration in its chest shifted its pitch. The aggressive, jagged rattling of its hydraulic throat valves slowed down, smoothing out into a heavy, rhythmic cadence. A sound began to echo from deep within the beast's massive thoracic cavity. It started as a low, structural shudder, like tectonic plates sliding across each other in slow motion, before resolving into a deep, resonant rumble that shook the dust from the ceiling vents. It was a purr. Outside the glass, Vrix dropped his data slate. It clattered against the metallic floor, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of green light. "That is statistically impossible," the chief medical officer whispered, his translation box glitching as it tried to pass the acoustic signature. "A Class 12 apex predator does not express contentment. Its neurological framework lacks the oxytocin receptors for social bonding. It is biologically incapable of—" "It's just scared, Vrix," Arthur called out from beneath the mountain of muscle, his hand rhythmically stroking the warm, vulnerable skin beneath the creature's jaw. "You put a wild animal in a cage, poked it with a hot iron for 6 months, and called it a monster when it tried to defend itself. Anyone would be terrified." The beast lowered its massive head, resting its entire weight against Arthur's shoulder like an oversized, scaly hound seeking comfort after a long storm. The bleeding stump of its missing forelimb twitched once, then relaxed as a secondary panel of medical nanobots, which had been lying dormant in the room, cautiously drifted forward, sensing the sudden drop in host aggression, and began to knit the torn tissue together without resistance. The observation gallery remained utterly silent. Ambassadors, generals, and xenobiologists who had conquered worlds with fleets of dreadnoughts stared through the glass in stunned, paralyzed disbelief. They had spent millennia trying to dominate the universe through sheer, unbridled force, building bigger weapons and sharper armor to subjugate the wildness of the cosmos. And here was a human volunteer, sitting on the floor of a maximum security containment cell, scratching behind the ears of a literal engine of extinction. The lesson here is simple, yet it is the hardest truth any empire will ever have to learn. You cannot conquer the universe by treating it like an enemy to be subdued. When you encounter the darkness of the deep void, do not reach for a weapon. Reach out a hand, offer patience where the world offers pain, and remember that even the most terrifying monster in the galaxy is just something that hasn't been told it's safe yet. The cage doors are open now, and the wilderness is waiting. Be the warmth in the dark. The purr of the apex predator rattled the floorboards of the observation bay long after the medical nanobots had finished their work, sealing the ragged stump of the creature's forelimb with a smooth, silvery alloy skin. Outside the reinforced glass, Chief Medical Officer Vrix slowly retrieved his shattered data slate from the floor, his mandibles clicking in a bewildered, arrhythmic stutter. He tapped the communication comms link with a trembling claw, his voice broadcasting directly into Arthur's earpiece inside the containment cell. Foster Handler Arthur, Vrix clicked, the automated translator struggling to smooth out the sheer disbelief in the arthropod's tone. The biological telemetry is reading a complete neural reset. Cortisol levels have dropped by 94%. But this defies every protocol of the Interstellar Zoological Codex. How did you bypass its territorial instinct? Arthur didn't look up from his spot on the floor. He kept one hand resting flat against the warm, carbonized scales of the beast's chest, feeling the slow, heavy thud of its secondary heart. Instinct isn't a permanent lock, Vrix, Arthur murmured back, his voice carrying clearly through the room's open audio pickup. It's just a habit formed out of fear. You spent 6 cycles poking it with electrified prods because you expected it to bite. And because you expected it to bite, it gave you exactly what you asked for. You built a prison and called it a nature study. The monster shifted its immense weight, letting out a soft, huffing sigh that blew a loose lock of Arthur's hair across his forehead. It tucked its massive head closer into the crook of Arthur's shoulder, looking less like an engine of planetary extinction and more like an overgrown, scaly hound that had finally found a warm hearth after a freezing winter. Vrix stared at the display, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the steady green of a completely stabilized life sign monitor. The implications were staggering. For millennia, the Galactic Syndicate had operated on the foundational doctrine that the cosmos was an untamed wilderness of apex threats, manageable only through absolute subjugation, chemical sedation, and overwhelming military containment. If Class 12 entities, and the thousands of other hyperlethal fauna scattered across the hostile frontiers of the Orion Arm, could be integrated through something as unscientific as emotional resonance, the entire economic and military foundation of the Syndicate's containment empire would become obsolete overnight. We must prepare the transport cradle, Vrix clicked, trying to regain his professional composure. We will transfer specimen 004 to the deep core isolation vault on Station 15. Now that we know it can be calmed, we can begin harvesting its neural tissue for. Arthur's hand stopped moving. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and instantly chilling. Inside the cell, the massive creature's amber eyes snapped open again, the vertical slits instantly narrowing as a low, structural rumble began to vibrate through the floor once more. But this time, it wasn't a purr. It was a sharp, rising frequency that made the magnetic seals on the quartz door hum in protest. "You're going to do what, Vrix?" Arthur asked, his voice dropping into a quiet, dangerous register. Vrix hesitated, his claws clicking nervously against the console. The protocols require that dangerous specimens be secured in. "Listen to me very carefully, Vrix," Arthur interrupted, gently patting the beast's snout to keep the rising aggression in check. "You are not moving him anywhere, and you are certainly not harvesting anything. You're going to requisition a proper, open-air habitat wing with a dirt floor, a heated sun lamp, and a daily shipment of fresh, high-protein bone meal. Because if I see so much as a single sedative needle or a transport cradle wheeled down this corridor, I am going to let him out of this room. And I promise you, he won't be scared this time." The observation gallery erupted into a flurry of panicked whispers. Ambassadors and military attachés began scrambling away from the front glass, suddenly remembering that 3 meters of quartz wasn't nearly as thick as it looked when an enraged apex predator was staring right at them. Vrix looked at the monster, then looked through the glass at Arthur, whose calm, unblinking expression carried the unmistakable weight of a man who had entirely stopped caring about galactic bureaucracy. The arthropod swallowed hard, his mandibles twitching in absolute defeat. "Requisition. Requisition approved," Vrix clicked, his voice defeated. "The habitat wing will be prepared by the end of the shift." Arthur gave a single, approving nod. "Good. Now, send down a bucket of warm water and a heavy-duty scrub brush. We've got 6 cycles of space grime to wash off, and he hates being tickled behind the ears." As the comlink clicked off, a new realization began to ripple through the upper echelons of the station's administration. Humanity hadn't joined the galactic community to play by their rules, and they certainly hadn't come to be conquered or contained. They had come to adopt the universe. And for an empire built on cold steel and clinical detachment, that was the most terrifying thing of all. The habitat wing designated for specimen 004, now informally renamed Barnaby by a maintenance crew that had abandoned all professional protocol, was completed in record time. Chief Medical Officer Vrix had personally supervised the installation of the dirt flooring, importing 3 tons of nutrient-rich loam from a Class 4 agricultural world, alongside a commercial-grade sun lamp that hummed with a warm, amber glow. When Barnaby was finally led out of the quarantine ward, not by armed guards with stun pikes, but by Arthur walking casually ahead with a canvas bucket of warm, soapy water and a long-handled brush, the entire administrative board of Station 12 watched from the upper catwalks in stunned silence. The massive, carbonized predator didn't slink or snarl. It ambled forward with the lazy, proprietary gait of a household mastiff exploring a new backyard. Its newly regenerated forelimb flexed smoothly, testing the rich soil beneath its claws with apparent satisfaction. As the artificial sun lamp hit its scales, the midnight black carapaces caught the light, shimmering with iridescent shades of deep violet and forest green. Arthur set the bucket down near a massive boulder that had been trucked in for scratching purposes, sat cross-legged on the dirt, and patted his knee. "Come here, big guy, let's get that space dust off you." Barnaby let out a low, tectonic rumble that rattled the glass observation panels 3 levels up, lumbered over, and flopped his massive, armored head squarely into Arthur's lap, nearly sending the human tumbling backward into the mud. Vrix, standing on the catwalk with a digital clipboard gripped tightly in his clawed hands, clicked his mandibles in profound philosophical exhaustion. "It is completely illogical," Vrix muttered to an assistant science officer who was frantically taking notes. "A creature with that level of thermal output and musculoskeletal density should require a high-security isolation grid, constant chemical management, and 0 social enrichment. Instead, it is essentially receiving belly rubs." The assistant, a young bipedal amphibian whose skin was pale with residual shock, adjusted his spectacles. "Sir, the telemetry data from the sector sensors is even more concerning." "Concerning?" Vrix snapped. "In what way? The beast is calm, the sector is safe." "Not just safe, sir," the assistant whispered, tapping his screen. "Since Handler Arthur established the foster protocol with specimen 004, the local energy readings in the lower sublevels have stabilized completely. The creatures in adjacent containment cells, Class 8 scavengers, Class 10 stalkers, they've stopped thrashing against their bulkheads. They can hear Barnaby purring through the ventilation ducts. It's creating a systemic calming frequency across the entire biological wing. Vrix stared down at the human and the apex predator below. Arthur was currently scrubbing behind one of Barnaby's primary sensory horns with a soapy brush, while the multi-jawed terror of the Carina Reach was kicking its hind leg in rhythmic, uncoordinated ecstasy, scratching an itch it hadn't been able to reach in 3 centuries. "We built this station as a fortress," Vrix whispered, the realization dawning with a heavy, crushing weight. "We surrounded ourselves with razor wire, energy shields, and automated guns because we assumed the universe was trying to destroy us." "And humanity?" the assistant asked softly. Vrix watched as Arthur tossed a dried nutrient biscuit into the air, which Barnaby caught with the precision of a trained seal, letting out a happy, booming chuff that echoed off the steel walls. "Humanity didn't build a fortress," Vrix said, shaking his head. "They brought a porch, and they're inviting everyone up to sit on it." The news of the Foster Protocol did not stay contained to Station 12 for long. Within a standard month, the secure data channels of the Galactic Zoological Syndicate were flooded with transmissions from outlying research posts across the Orion Arm. Outposts monitoring silicon-based swarm entities in the methane storms of Kepler-9, deep-crust leviathans in the crushing gravity wells of the core worlds, and crystalline stalkers in the frozen wastes of the Outer Rim reported a sudden, unprecedented shift in tactical containment metrics. The human volunteers hadn't requested more weapons, heavier armor, or reinforced security details. Instead, requisition orders coming out of Earth's Deployment Bureau consisted almost entirely of heavy-duty scrub brushes, extra-large chew toys made of high-density vulcanized rubber, industrial quantities of organic peanut butter, and custom-built orthopedic bedding. Empires that had spent millennia mastering the art of war suddenly found themselves completely unequipped for a species whose ultimate weapon of mass subjugation was unyielding, aggressively stubborn empathy. Back in the habitat wing, Arthur finally finished the bath, wiping soapy water off his forehead with the back of his forearm. Barnaby shook himself like an oversized dog, sending a fine mist of water droplets across the glass partition, before curling up into a massive, scaly heap directly across Arthur's legs, effectively trapping the human on the dirt floor. Arthur sighed, leaning back against the warm stone boulder, closing his eyes as the low, steady vibration of the beast's purr hummed through his spine. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wristcom, and tapped out a quick message to the Geneva Administrative Hub. "Hey Marcus," Arthur typed into his comms, "we're going to need a bigger habitat wing. The Class 10 spine crawler from Sector 6 just got delivered, and it looks like it really wants a belly rub." A few seconds later, his wristcom blinked with a reply from the Department of Administrative Corrections. "Request approved, Arthur," Marcus Vance replied back. "Just remember to file the cuteness tax exemption form under subsection 12, paragraph B. And for the love of everything, don't let the accountant from the trade syndicate see you giving the apex predator treats. He'll try to audit their caloric intake." Arthur smiled, looking down at the sleeping mountain of scales and bone spikes resting peacefully across his knees. "Let him try," Arthur whispered into the empty air, reaching out to scratch behind Barnaby's ear. "We'll just sue them for emotional damages." Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.